There are certain fears that do not arrive suddenly or violently, but instead take shape slowly, almost imperceptibly, forming in the quiet spaces between ordinary moments, where the familiar begins to feel uncertain, and the smallest inconsistencies carry a weight that is difficult to explain. And in the quiet suburban landscape of Bellevue, Washington, that kind of fear did not begin with a scream or a visible intrusion, but with a series of subtle changes inside a home that seemed too minor to matter, and yet too persistent to ignore, until those changes revealed something far more disturbing than coincidence. A presence that had been there all along, moving silently, watching patiently, and waiting for the moment when observation would become action. In a neighborhood where every house appeared to mirror the next in its quiet symmetry, where trimmed hedges framed walkways and soft interior lights glowed through windows in the evening, creating an illusion of comfort that felt both reliable and complete, Julia Sanders lived alone in a modern home designed to offer both convenience and security, a space equipped with technology meant to simplify life and eliminate uncertainty. And yet, for reasons she could not fully articulate, it was within this carefully controlled environment that something began to feel increasingly, undeniably wrong. Julia was not the kind of person to overlook details or dismiss intuition without consideration, because her work as a user experience designer had trained her to notice patterns, to question inconsistencies, and to understand that even the smallest irregularity could indicate a larger issue beneath the surface. And it was precisely this awareness that made what she began to experience so difficult to rationalize, because the changes she noticed did not conform to any logical explanation, nor did they present themselves in a way that could be easily proven. At first, the differences were subtle enough to be dismissed as memory lapses, small shifts in her environment that could be explained away by distraction or routine, such as a chair that seemed slightly out of place, a cabinet door left open when she was certain she had closed it, or a light that remained on in a room she distinctly remembered turning off. And while each of these moments could be explained individually, together they formed a pattern that began to erode her sense of certainty. As the days passed, that pattern grew more pronounced, not in a way that escalated dramatically, but in a way that deepened her unease, because it suggested not randomness, but intention, as though someone, or something, was interacting with her space in ways that were deliberate, controlled, and just subtle enough to remain undetected. On the evening of August 3rd, Julia returned home just before sunset, the fading light casting long shadows across the interior of her house as she moved through her usual routine, placing her belongings in their designated places, preparing dinner, and attempting to settle into the comfort of familiarity. And yet, even in these ordinary moments, there was a lingering tension, a quiet awareness that something was not as it should be. At approximately 7:30 p.m., she sent a message to a close friend, describing the feeling not as fear, but as something off, a word that carried with it an ambiguity that made it difficult to dismiss, but equally difficult to define. And while her friend responded with reassurance, suggesting stress or distraction as possible explanations, Julia could not shake the sense that what she was experiencing was something more concrete, something real. By the time the evening had settled into its usual stillness, Julia made a decision that would later become central to the investigation, because rather than dismissing her concerns, she chose to document them, activating a recording application on her phone and placing it discreetly on a nearby surface. Not because she had heard anything specific, but because she believed that if something was happening, it might reveal itself when she was not actively searching for it. The recording began in silence, capturing the ambient sounds of a quiet home, the faint hum of appliances, the subtle creaks that accompany any structure settling into the night. And for several minutes, there was nothing to suggest that her concerns were justified, nothing that would distinguish that recording from any other moment of stillness. But as time passed, something began to emerge. At first, it was almost indistinguishable from the background noise, a faint sound that could have been dismissed as the house itself, shifting or settling. But gradually, it became more defined, more deliberate, until it could no longer be ignored as anything other than what it was: movement. The sound of footsteps, slow, measured, inside the house. The significance of that realization was profound, because Julia was alone, or at least she believed she was, and yet the recording captured the unmistakable presence of another person, someone moving through her space with a level of control that suggested familiarity rather than intrusion. Moments later, a voice could be heard, low, controlled, barely above a whisper. "You notice too much." The recording ended abruptly. By the following morning, Julia Sanders was dead. When officers arrived at her home, they found no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle, and no immediate indication of how someone could have entered or exited without detection. And yet, the presence captured in that recording left no doubt that she had not been alone. The investigation quickly focused on the structure of the house itself, searching for any hidden access points that could explain how someone had remained undetected. And it was during this process that they discovered the attic access panel in the hallway ceiling, a detail so ordinary it had gone unnoticed, and yet so significant that it would ultimately reveal the truth. Inside the attic, investigators found evidence of habitation: disturbed insulation, discarded materials, and traces of human presence that suggested not a single intrusion, but repeated access over an extended period of time, leading to the chilling conclusion that someone had been living above Julia's home, observing her routine, studying her behavior, and waiting for the moment when observation would give way to action. The suspect, identified as Adrian Wells, had previously worked on the construction of the property, giving him intimate knowledge of its layout, its hidden spaces, and the ways in which it could be accessed without detection. And what investigators uncovered about his actions revealed a pattern of behavior that was as methodical as it was disturbing, because he had not simply entered the home on the night of the crime, but had instead established a presence within it, moving silently through the attic, observing from above, and gradually interacting with the environment in ways that tested the boundaries of detection. On the night of August 3rd, that presence became physical. He descended. The confrontation that followed was brief, controlled, and devastatingly quiet, leaving behind no visible signs of struggle, no immediate evidence of intrusion, and only the recording as proof that Julia had sensed what others could not see. Adrian Wells was eventually arrested, and his confession revealed a mindset defined by control, observation, and a disturbing sense of detachment, as though the act itself had been less about violence and more about the culmination of a process he had carefully constructed over time. He was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. But the case left behind something far more difficult to resolve than the question of guilt. It left behind a sense of unease, because Julia had noticed, she had questioned, she had tried to understand, and still, it had not been enough. And in homes just like hers, where quiet spaces exist above ceilings and behind walls, where small changes can be dismissed as coincidence, and where routine creates the illusion of control, there remains a possibility that is as unsettling as it is difficult to ignore. That sometimes the things that move are not moving on their own.